Hey there, it's Nick Terzo, and this is the Radical Podcast. No, we won't be overthrowing any governments, but we will be learning from radical creatives who rule the world. Welcome back to another episode of The Radical. I'm your host, Nick Terzo. I hope this finds all of you remaining healthy and somehow figuring out how to store your energy that we're going to need in the month of November. As I promised in the opening to my last episode, we have a series of Legends of the Fall coming up in the next few weeks. And my guest this week is the full-on definition of legend and also a model of genius. Folks, you have no idea what this conversation personally means to me. My very special guest this week is the icon Bob Mould. Bob, as an artist, is an example of genius in action. His iconic band, Husker was revered by any musician that has ever mattered. Sugar was punk pop perfection. His remarkable solo work demonstrates not only perseverance, but also maintaining the highest level of quality. Bob has a new record out called Blue Hearts, and you all need to listen to this. It's incredible and it's crazy relevant. Earlier this week, he also released an incredible solo career box set called Distortion, which contains 24 CDs of his solo work with additional outtakes. Bob and I will discuss what it was like being gay men in the rock and roll game in the late 80s and early 90s, his own activism, art, and much more. Coming up, my special chat with one of my music idols, Bob Mould. Hi, Bob.
Hey, Nick. How you doing today?
I am well. How is your quarantine life?
Quarantine life is, it's oddly reminiscent of being up on the farm in northern Minnesota in 1988. You know, it's pretty much me and the fruit trees, and I don't have 24 chickens running around my backyard right at the moment, which I used to have on the farm. But otherwise, yeah, I guess pandemic life is good. I'm healthy, and you know, getting some sleep, eating well, all that fun stuff.
That's great. What would have you been doing this year, man? Did you have touring set to support everything that you're releasing this fall?
Yeah, so the new album Blue Hearts, September 25, we were scheduled to be on the road shortly after that. And that touring would have gone through November. And of course, all of those plans have been are being rescheduled as we speak.
Yeah, how many times?
Trying to keep it to a minimum. I guess I was being cautious with my business folks and saying, I think we got to at least get past this election before we can start making real plans.
Right. I think that's a fair bet.
Yes.
So you kind of snuck in recording this record just before everything kind of shut down up in Chicago. Is that where you recorded Blue Hearts?
Yeah, the new album was recorded in early February and recorded that at Steve Albini's studio, Electrical Audio in Chicago. I believe that's our third time with this band recording in that studio. It's a great facility, and there's really when you have sub-zero snow every day, it keeps you busy inside the studio.
Yeah. How fast were you able to record this time? I mean, have you got it down pat now, or you're just in and out?
Well, I think with Blue Hearts, the material, the objective was to go for a very sort of rough and ready approach, not a lot of extra takes, not a lot of finessing. The recordings, just go get on the floor and play. And the band component, where it's rhythm guitar, bass, and drums, that took 4 days this time, which is a little quicker than usual. And then after that, I spend about a week, just sort of looking at guitars, looking at words, looking at vocals, and sort of pacing all of that extra stuff across a number of days. And then once we got all that done, came back to the Bay Area and went to a studio called New Improved Recording over in Oakland and spent 5 days mixing. So all told 2 weeks, and it was very quick process.
Is all your writing usually done before you go in? I mean, are you that guy, or do you do some writing while you're recording?
I like to leave a few songs open ended and just let the sort of let the flow of the session and let the topics of the moment dictate those last little bits. And but with this record, I mean the song American Crisis, which is the first song people heard from the record back in early June. That song was written in April of 2018 while I was living in Berlin. So I mean, that was one of the tent poles for the writing of Blue Hearts. It got taken off of Sunshine Rock and held in pocket. And yeah, I mean, I tend to have a really strong idea of what the framework of the record and what the foundation of the record is, but it's always good to leave a few windows open just for a little fresh air at the very end.
Right. Well, what I like about you too is, I mean, the vacillation between projects. Because if you look, the world's a way different place today than it was maybe when you wrote Sunshine Rock. Even though American Crisis came out of that, but I like how you shift from that record, which is, I think, very melodic, highly polished, and now we're kind of in Blue Hearts, which is raw as hell, which
Hmm.
is awesome and
Yes.
so guitar driven. And I love this record. So I just think it's your shift just in a short period of time. To me, is fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, across the 5 records that I've made with John Worster, my drummer, and Jason Narducci, my bassist and vocalist, we started back in early 2012 recording what became Silver Age, the first of the 5 albums for Merge. And we had played together for a couple of years, but it was the first time the three of us got in a room to make a record, and it was a very celebratory record. It was put together to line up time wise with the 20th anniversary reissues of the Sugar catalog, mainly Copper Blue, which came out in 1992. So that was a pretty upbeat kind of record, and then the 2 records that followed that, Beauty and Ruin and Patch the Sky, were informed by the loss of my father and then my mother. So when it came to Sunshine Rock, I made a conscious effort to write optimistically. Just I mean, I three down records in a row would have been a bit much for any of us, and yeah, I think I succeeded with that record. It reflected, this new life that I had created for myself and my partner over in Berlin, and all the big orchestration and deeper arrangements, and generally optimistic lyrics. That was a that I think I succeeded with that record, but again, the world was getting darker and darker every day, and when I got back to America in late 2019, I was sort of astonished at the sort of obvious polarity, just in the country where people had really chosen sides, and that always makes for good fodder for protest music, I suppose.
Right. How long were you actually in Berlin?
Um, It started going over in early 2016, found an apartment in the middle of 2016, and unfortunately, because of the pandemic, I had to wrap the apartment up about 4 months ago. So back in San Francisco full time, but that was a great experience. I love the city of Berlin. It's very progressive, and I can't wait to go back and visit friends once Americans are allowed out of our
Yeah, yeah.
out of our cages, so to speak.
It's so nice to be wanted around the world, isn't it?
We're number one.
Yeah, we are number one.
And
So.
what, I'm not sure, but
And so on this podcast, I don't tend to like break songs down too much. I leave that for kind of other people to do. But on Blue Hearts, I did find some interesting themes that you kind of had, and I thought opening with Heart on My Sleeve, I thought it was just quite literally like this raw, stripped down, it's just you, man, and an acoustic guitar, and it's boy, you feel that.
Yeah, it's a really stark way to start a record. It sort of lays out the topics that will be discussed throughout the record. So I think with a song like "Heart on My Sleeve," trying to show people, this record is very simple. It's in earnest. These are serious matters, and it reminds me of going to, sometimes when I go to the theater, and a play will start and the lights come down, and a solitary figure walks to the front of the stage and gives a soliloquy, I suppose, a couple minutes of laying out the terrain for the journey that's coming. And I try to keep that in mind when I'm making records. It's always good to use the first song to set the stage for what's to come. So that was, I think that was the idea with that. That was the idea with that orchestra, with that simple, sort of plaintive approach of just me in a room with a guitar and sharing these ideas that get fleshed out across the next 30 minutes.
Right. And does it, I get the impression, maybe like me too, that, as a gay man myself, coming out in the mid 80s, and your awakening was AIDS and, kind of being ignored and so forth. And that's how you got to start your life. And here we do a full arc to today. And, some things haven't changed, right? Here we are again. Is there a sense of that when you were kind of writing this?
Of course, that was a lot of the central theme, specifically with a song like American Crisis. Um, it's funny. I think the LGBTQ community has had, a lot of success in showing America that we're part of America. I guess, for lack of a better term, we are citizens of the country. We are taxpayers. We are educators. We are parents. We are renegades. We are politicians. We're well represented in the military. Having lived in D.C. for 7 years, I can attest to that. Um, but a lot of these small victories that we've accumulated since the '80s, which was a really sort of a moment, for me, of feeling terribly marginalized. All of these small victories that we gain across time can be reversed very easily. And I think that's what we're seeing now with this administration. And, yeah, I mean, my mind definitely went back to the 1980s when thinking about this record, and just some of the parallels that are very stark, between 1980 and 2016, and particularly 1983 and 2019, when I started having that terrible sense of, deja vu.
Mm. Yeah, I definitely can feel you on all of that. Um, and on the song like Siberian Butterfly,
Hmm.
I kind of read something that you'd kind of said is something, some of it's about the theme of art being consumed by wealthy people kind of as possessions.
Hmm.
And part of it dealt with a little bit about your, lack of confidence as a gay man, maybe earlier on. Not today, I assume.
Yeah, not today, but my journey to get to where I speak comfortably and openly as a gay man was a long journey, and it went through a lot of different phases, a lot of different stages, and it's I think there's a I think the times have definitely changed, I think, in the sense of younger people in America are very aware that sexuality is not necessarily a binary, it's not a black and white thing, that there's, many, sexuality presents itself in many different ways. And at the end of the day, people are people, and, sexuality is and sexual identity is part of who we are. For me, in the 1980s, it was, I was a guy in a rock band who happened to be gay. I did not feel like it was, the defining factor in my life in terms of, how I presented myself in my work. And then, through the '90s with, coming out, a little later than I probably could have or should have or would have liked to have come out. But, we all make that step when the time is right. And, then moving forward and, taking ownership of my sexual identity, especially in the last 20 years and how I align myself with my community and what I think I can do to help and what I think is best left to other people to do to help because they're much better at it than I would be, just knowing my own skill set. Um, yeah, I think the song talks about that metamorphosis, in a real innocent way. It's not a heavy-handed song at all. It's meant to be sort of a celebration of diversity and growth for all of us.
Because I agree with you. I mean, being in a rock band like you were in the '80s, when I was an A&R executive, signing a lot of rock bands and a lot of Seattle stuff. I hid that my identity, right? Because I didn't think, well, gee, you're dealing with bands that are rock bands. These guys are like only about girls and drugs and every rock and roll cliche, and I can't be myself around these guys. So I got to just tamp it down, both with the artists I'm dealing with, and secondly, inside of the corporate culture that I was within. So I went through that harshly, like in the late '80s and early '90s.
It's really interesting because those times were really different than where we're at now with America and how I think how generally America views our community. But yeah, back then it's almost I was talking to somebody a while ago about the idea of passing, that term, and I almost felt like it was an antiquated term these days, but then I realized that, trans folk definitely battle with the notion of passing, as far as, how one defines themselves or how others see people, in terms of, gender pronouns and things like that. But yeah, I always felt like in the '80s, just sort of keep doing what you do. And if you contribute and you do good work and, that'll be enough. But yeah, man, things were different back then. I mean, for you, did you ever feel? Well, I mean, I guess you mentioned it. You sort of felt like you had to tamp down, who you wanted to be or who you might be when you're not on the clock. It's a it's a really challenging thing, and it's funny now we have so many people that are coming forward. I know Rob Halford has been. I mean, I just love reading anything he's got. Or hearing his words. He's turned into quite the sage.
Yes. Yeah, and I got a chance to work with him when I was at Columbia because I wanted to, because he was somewhat open at that time. So I, tried to help him out with his solo work back then. So I have enormous respect for him. So
Yeah, that's that little bit right before you and I, got into the business, and I just can't imagine in the late '70s how tricky navigating your sexuality was if it didn't involve, sort of the typical, heterosexual rock star groupie drugs kind of business that is so weird to think about now.
it seems only Freddie Mercury managed to do it in his own way. So,
Yeah, I mean,
yeah.
Elton gave it a shot. I mean, yeah, it's
Yes.
it's and there's people like Jabriath, of course, who were just so outrageous, and you know,
Yeah.
the real David Bowie, I guess, or whatever he used to, he used to
Yeah.
portray himself.
But I think for guys like you and I, look, I'm not going to label you, but I feel like we're a little bit more outliers in a way. Our interests are different culturally, maybe a little differently. I was into hard rock music and punk music, and it's just different. I had different guideposts, which made me a little bit more of an outlier as a gay man, I felt.
hmm Yeah, it's funny. I have friends in the Bay Area who are young, a generation younger than I, who maybe came out a little later than the youngest generation does, and they sort of talk about that. God, where are all the guys at shows? I go to shows and I have trouble getting get my gay friends to go to metal shows or hard rock shows, and it's Yeah, I guess the good news is it speaks to the diversity of our communities, but yeah, it's still I think there's still remnants of that a little bit. The ideas, sort of stereotypes maybe from the past, or just how people gather, I suppose.
Right. Well, and on a good note, with Blue Hearts, I thought it was interesting how you ended the record with the last two songs, which was "Password to My Soul," right, in the ocean, and I felt
Hmm.
like both of those were so healing after the 12 songs before that. You know what I mean, or the 10 songs.
Yes.
I mean, 10 songs before that took you through a pretty rattling ride, and it was nice to end kind of with that healing way out
Yeah.
of the record.
Yeah, Password to My Soul was, when I talk about leaving the window open for, for the vibe of a session, that song, the words, came together as we were recording the record because I always look to, I try to look to create a summary, I guess, or a closing statement for a record. And then a song like The Ocean was to me an epilogue of sorts. But yeah, Password to My Soul, if you look at it, it sort of revisits all of the themes that were established earlier and tries to give resolution through music, through healing. This is why we dedicate our lives to the craft. Is it's for me, it's all I have. I think it's the same for a lot of musicians. This is our voice, and this is what we do. We're journalists, we're storytellers, we're musicians, and in times of doubt, in times of confusion, music is the sort of the pillar for everything that we do and we live for. So yeah, nice way to wrap up record with those two ideas.
No, it was well done, my friend. Well done.
Thank you.
How did you end up like meeting up then with like Jason and John and kind of collaborating over the last few years?
Well, Jason Narducci and I have been friends since 1990. I met Jason at a sound check of a solo show I was performing in Chicago. He showed up with some press clippings and some live tapes that friends had made of shows and some demos of songs that he was working on. And we stayed in touch and started collaborating on other things over the years. Jason had a band in the 90s called Verbo, and I produced a record, with them, to help him out with some of his music. In the 2000s, Jason started playing bass with me on the road, I think in '05. And then we had a tour, I think it might have been in 2008. And we had a drummer in the band who was really good drummer, but maybe not for the style of music we play live. And John Worster became available in the middle of this tour that Jason and I were doing with a keyboard player and a drummer. And John came in to sort of came in the late innings to help close out the tour, and it was just like magic. He learned the entire set at sound check one day, and it was something like that happens. You recognize that all the people are speaking the same language unconsciously.
Yes. And how, like, since we got into the live thing a little bit, when you have a body of work like yours over so much time and you have a lot of output, I mean, regardless of how many years are involved, you're totally proficient and
Yep.
and very good at writing songs and putting music out. How do you decide like a set now for like when you tour? Like what goes through that?
Well, the new material is always the focus. We play as much of a new record as possible. Typically, at least half the record, sometimes two-thirds of the record. And had we been touring right now for Blue Hearts, we would have been playing all of the record because these songs were built for the stage. In terms of other, non new album material, I think I used to be a I used to be more of a contrarian. I used to stay, not focus on the hits or the favorites And I think as time has gone on, I recognize the fact that I have to be mindful of giving the people at least some of what they want. So it's, so I look back at, the evergreen songs, the ones that are always favorites for all people, and try to make sure that those are well represented in a set. Um, I think we're very mindful of our strong suits. There have been records that I've made with other musicians besides Jason and John, where stylistically it's maybe not our collective strong suit as Bob, John, and Jason. So, we might stay away from those, or we might try to rework them a little bit. And then there's other songs that are right smack dab in the middle of our collective wheelhouse, and those are always on the list. So it's focusing on a new material, being mindful to scatter some hits, and then look at deep cuts and things that fit well, with our style, and also things that fit well in a set list with the new material. Things that help to sort of highlight how we got to new material. So I mean, I spend a fair amount of time thinking about all that well before a tour, and I usually come in with a number of set lists, number of ideas, and then we sort of pare it down to maybe 40 songs that we keep in rotation. And over time, when you mess with a set at the beginning of a tour, second, third, fourth show, and then all of a sudden, boom, it clicks, and the show becomes flawless, and then you tend to use that as the baseline for the rest of the tour.
Bob the curator,
Yes,
basically.
yes.
And speaking of curation, I have to ask you. You have a enormous box set coming out called Distortion Box
hmm
the next couple of weeks. Is it out now? It's out now, or is it
Just
pre-order now?
it's pre-order now. Distortion, the box set, both in CD and vinyl forms, will be. I think they're going to start delivering in mid-October at this point.
Okay.
I think we were originally at the beginning of the month, and then we had a couple snafus just with coronavirus
Yes.
related production stuff. So,
Yes.
it'll definitely, everything will be fulfilled by Halloween at the latest. So
Awesome.
yeah,
I have to buy one of those. Um, so my question kind of is, when you've had the career you've had, and in my mind, you're a legend. So I'll just put that out there.
thank you.
You are. You've been such an influence on so many people that I think we can probably go back and debate some people's songwriting that's gone on and give you credits for a lot of different people's music. Um,
That.
but let's do it. Um, but how do you come like at what point? Because I think you view yourself as a current artist, and you are, and you're validly current.
Yeah.
How do you decide to like cross the line and say, you know what, it's time to put it all together? I'm putting everything out there. There's stuff I don't even want to hear again, perhaps.
Mhm.
What goes through your mind, and how do you know it's the right time to kind of do this?
Well, Demon Music Group, who's overseeing the box set, and it's originating out of the UK, where Demon is based. They, I worked with them in 2012 for the parallel reissues, of the Sugar material. Merge had started working with me, ostensibly for the Sugar reissues. Demon was the parallel partner for the rest of the world, and they did a pretty good job with those Sugar reissues. And we stayed in touch over the years. And about 5 years ago, they proposed, a solo career spanning box set. And I was like, well, I'm really busy with current albums right now. So if there comes a time on the calendar where it looks like there'll be a break and we can make it work, we should aim for that. So in 2019, at the beginning of the year, I thought, great, Sunshine Rock is coming out. We'll get all the touring done, and then I can address a box set and maybe get it on the calendar for fall of 2020. So that's how we got to that point where we started generating assets in earnest. But then, Blue Hearts just started writing itself out of nowhere, and then I was like, "Uh-oh, we have a problem here. I think these two are going to happen at the same time." And then went to Demon and went to Merge and said, "Can we make this work?" And everybody thought about it for a minute and said, "Yeah, I think this is one of those cases where more is more. So let's go for more this time." And here we are, and it's worked out great so far. I think to have a 30-year retrospective alongside a current album that's incredibly timely in a sort of uncanny way, like not an enjoyable way, but uncanny. And to have a current album that sounds closer to things that happened before the box set, it's a bit of at least a wrinkle, I guess, in the fabric of time. I don't know if it's quite a rip, but it's it's sort of a funny one to me. It's like how this new album break through all of this decades of other stuff to go backwards in time. But anyhow,
I don't know. I think it's a nice compliment. I think that totally works as a strategy. And then what are the like on the there's bonus stuff on here? Are those outtakes from other things, or is there new stuff, or is it mostly outtakes?
it's mostly outtakes, B-sides, live material that was released in limited form back in the day. We also went through and collected up all of the available collaborations that I've done over the years, whether it was singing a song for the Sixth's album, whether it was things I did with the late Vic Chestnut, to Butch Walker, to Foo Fighters, to Throwing Muses, to Golden Palominos, to the Richard Thompson tribute song with John Doe and DJ Bonebreak, stuff like that. Just a lot of sort of not unreleased, but sort of maybe uncompiled tracks. So there's that audio component. We the biggest thing to one of the biggest parts of it that I really enjoy was reimagining all of the album covers. Working with an artist in Munich, Germany named Simon Marchner, uh, and he and I worked together to try to create a travelogue that would help to illuminate all of the different places that I've lived over the 30 years that those records were written and recorded, and try to give people try to give it a coherency. And also looking at the mastering and the sound of records, trying to get everything to fit together better. So it was a really big project. I think
No,
we're done with it.
really ambitious, very ambitious. So,
Yeah, thanks.
but I can't wait. I can't wait to get my hands on it. So, you kind of hit a theme in there that's interesting to me. We're both kind of upstate New York kids. That's where we were born, you and I,
Yeah.
and I think about a county away from each other.
Oh my gosh.
And I've had a little bit of a nomadic life, and I've always felt like, hey, every city I go to, everyone says, well, Bob Mould's he's moved.
Uh,
Bob's moved here.
oh.
You guys should meet. I always feel like I'm kind of stalking you. But how is like that part of your life, seeing different places, being part of different communities, like how has that shaped your view, and has it shaped your writing? I'm sure it has, but
Yeah, I mean it's environment is key to the creative process. Where geographically where you are. I grew up in the Adirondacks. You and I both know what a harsh winter really looks like. And then to go to the Twin Cities and spend 11 years both at college and with Husker Du and up in northern Minnesota as well. That environment where you're inside 6 months a year, it really changes your outlook on life. It's very different than say living in San Francisco where I am now. I spent 3 years in Austin, Texas in the 90s, and I think I have a good sense of Austin back in the 90s before South by Southwest became a worldwide industry. It was a progressive college town state capital in the middle of a very conservative state. So I learned a lot about guns and what people perceive their rights to be. So you get an understanding for what red life is, I suppose. I spent a lot of time living in New York City, and that's New York is New York, and is such an amazing place. And Washington D.C., a town that is based on government and military, and higher education, and just how that was a really close up look at real disparity within communities. Living in central DC and going 3 blocks away and feeling like I'm in a completely different culture and not being sure if I'm part of the problem or part of the solution. I think a lot of the things that that it's been a life well traveled and well spent so far. Not to Berlin. I mean, 4 years of a living in a completely different culture that values free speech and democracy, well beyond what we're capable of at this moment in America. To live and see protests on a weekly basis, where just a protest would pop up in the middle of the street unannounced to anybody, and you just stop and you take it in, and you go, wow, people can gather and protest whenever they want.
Yeah, there's definitely more shining examples of democracy, it seems, sadly, in this country currently. Um, and on, being so prolific, we're getting into our third chapters in life. Do you, Does it come to you when it comes to you and I just got to deal with it? Or is it like, are you getting to the point? I was talking to John Doe a little bit about this, about his being prolific. And he said, me? He goes, go talk to Willie Nelson. I got nothing going on. So, is that something you look at? Like, you know what? I don't know if I can go out and tour every year anymore. I don't know what I've got in me, but you seem to be robust and prolific.
Well, yeah, I guess currently with the pandemic and the sort of stay-at-home orders for the last 6 months, the good news for me is that I've been able to you know eat at home almost every meal, cooking, and getting a lot of good exercise every day, and really taking care of myself so that I am ready when it's time to go back to work. I don't want to I don't want to try to get in shape 3 weeks before it's time to go. So,
Right.
as I get older, the actual mechanics of touring get a little bit tougher. It's I always try to tell people doing those shows is not a problem. The tricky part as one gets older is the recovery time. So I have to take that into consideration when we put together tour scheduling. It's always a balance between how many shows in a row can my body handle versus how many days off will make the tour less profitable and less likely to happen. So those are just like inside baseball logistics that
Right.
most people don't think about. Um, in terms of creativity specifically, um, my output is directly related to how much I take in. When I've got a quiet life of solitude, I tend to write from the inside. My life in Berlin was more outgoing and more social and more on the street than it is in San Francisco. So I tended to write more vibrant characters and more, just maybe more exciting scenarios. They weren't quite as interior. But overall, my motto always is I'm just the guy with a big rain bucket, and when it starts to rain, I go outside and I catch as much water as I can. I bring it home, and then I figure out what to do with it. So,
Yeah. Awesome. That's awesome. So who have been your bigger influences? Like, I mean, just in art in general, you don't even have to talk about musicians.
oh my gosh, in terms of writing, I guess with music stuff, I mean, I was born in 1960. I had a good understanding of pop music through the mid 60s and late 60s. As a young kid, I had a lot of jukebox singles and was able to buy a couple albums a year. So, I could tell the Lennon songs from the McCartney songs. I understood what the Who were saying. I knew what the Hollies were about. Uh, I did. I guess it took me years to figure out that this guy Jimmy Webb, that wrote all these amazing songs in the 1960s, was the songwriter. I
Mm,
mean, I knew that he was the songwriter, but I guess I didn't realize how many songs of his were important to me. I guess being a Fifth Dimension fan first. After that, I think as far as contemporaries in my early days, like Pete Shelley from the Buzzcocks, that's where I did not know anything about Pete Shelley's sexuality at the time, but I was able to recognize that he was a master of writing gender neutral love songs,
Mm.
and that appealed to me. So I think I was able to sort of sneak that into my methodology. As a big Joy Division fan, I thought, Ian Curtis wrote some really, sad, poetic, emotional words and was a great performer. So, I mean, found a fair amount of inspiration there. Along the way after that, with, visual artists, I mean, people, there's, sort of an obscure artist, Roman Opalka, who spent decades of his life painting numbers on large canvases, in varying degrees of contrast. And he sort of was a sort of an interesting character because he would document every number that he painted into an audio recorder. And the volume of work that he created in his lifetime, when you look at it in large exhibits, it almost looks like a series of patches of vinyl because it's just these weird, these sequential numbers in tones that create these grooves. And I think he's probably I would say close to my favorite visual artist. I mean, there's
When did he paint? Like what period of time?
it was a lot in the 60s, 70s was his main period. His last name is Opalka, and good luck finding much about him. He's just one of those European artists that sort of fell through the cracks. And I was lucky to see a retrospective of his work at, I think it was at Minneapolis College of Art and Design, or it might have been Minneapolis Art Institute in in the mid late '80s. It left a real impression. People like Anselm Kiefer, Mark Rothko. I mean, people, sort of the darker late 20th century stuff.
Right. Well, that's all
Yeah.
great. I'm going to look up, I'm going to find Opelka.
Ro-
Opelka?
Roman Opelka.
Yeah, I'm
Yeah,
going to
some
find his work.
crazy stuff.
It's great. So I've got a couple more questions and then we'll get you out of here. And one is, with the guitar and with your voice, I'm always interested because the guitar drives so many things for you. Is that always kind of intentional? I mean, do you have confidence in your singing as the guitar sometimes seems to override it? Is there any, I don't know what I would say. Is there a method to that in any way or not?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I think in order, my strong suits are rhythm guitar, composition, and then singing and lead guitar are probably tied for last. It's so I tend to write to my strong suit, which is rhythm guitar and sort of those large blocks of neither major nor minor chords. And then I tend to let the vocal melody set the emotional space. Whether the melody's like your favorite thing, which is a positive major key melody, or whether it's a song like "Sinners and Their Repentances," which is that darker minor key. So just like the simple levers that you can pull as a writer. Given the choice between if somebody put me in a band and said, "Do you want to play rhythm guitar or lead guitar?" I would always take rhythm guitar.
Good for you.
Yes, yeah, it's way more important, I think,
Winner,
than
winner.
yeah. It's I tend to look at it that way. I think I'm really good with words. I have a lot of simple tricks that I use over and over, with consonants and sibilants, in the idea of where I put S's and T's and P's,
Hmm.
and how they relate to the percussive movement of a track, with drums. I mean, those are just little things, and they don't always happen in the creative process. Those are the kinds of things I might separate out for the editing
Right.
process. As I'm writing, again, it's the rain bucket. But after that period is done and it's time to formalize a song so that others can learn it, that's when I go in and do the refining and using those extra, a little more surgical, I guess, in the toolkit.
Right. That makes sense. And I will never doubt how you rank your rhythm guitar playing. But I would rank your vocals higher. I'm sorry.
Oh, thanks.
I love those vocals. Sorry, my friend.
No, it's good. I mean, it's an interesting voice, to be sure. I'm not, it's mine, so I have to listen to it all the time. So I'm not the biggest fan of it.
Yeah, unique is good. Unique is good.
All right.
And lastly, I just want to ask you: is there anything new you're listening to that you really dig?
Well, my guilty pleasure this summer has been the Dua Lipa album. I think Hallucinate is like the greatest gay bar song that will never get heard this summer because all the bars are closed.
Right.
So when I want to feel like it's Friday happy hour, I can just throw on the Dua Lipa album and jump around the house.
Awesome.
Let's see. As far as rock stuff, there's a group from Ontario called Metz, Metz, on Sub Pop, and they have a new album that's coming out in October. And I was lucky enough to get a version of it a few months ago. And I mean, it's great if you're a fan of, really, really dense, angular, big guitar music. Similar to some of the stuff you might hear coming out of the Midwest, like in the 90s, like Touch and Go kind of stuff. Maybe in that area. I like the new Bully album a lot. Trying to think of what other things. The Best Coast album that came out earlier this year is real good.
That's a good one.
I'm a big supporter of Chaz Bear, who works mostly under the name Toro y Moi. It's a more electronic, more R&B, more producerly at times, but he's a great live performer as well. It's a lot of I like a lot of the stuff that he does that leans more towards the French touch, French house kind of vibe.
Yes.
I'm a big fan of that. I'm always a sucker. If you got good French touch or French house, I will listen. I love my Filter House still. So
awesome. Are you still producing others or not so much anymore?
Yeah, the most recent production project was for working with a group from New York called Titus Andronicus. We worked together about almost 2 years ago. And Titus are also on Merge, and they wanted to make a rough and ready record. And we recorded that album at Electrical Audio in Chicago as well, in the A room, and mixed it at Oakland. And real great guys, super live band. And we made a fun sort of Americana meets first wave punk rock record that is, they're a great band, and it was a fun album to make. We had a time limit on ourselves to make it in 10 days or less, so we were able to get that done.
Fantastic. I will seek that. Is it out right now? Can I seek that out?
Yeah, the Titus Andronicus album is called An Obelisk, and I think it was released about a year and a half ago, so it should be quite available.
Awesome. Well, listen, my friend, I'm going to wrap this with you. I am really grateful you made the time. Your contributions on so many fronts creatively. I don't know. Everyone owes you a debt of something, I feel. And anyone who hasn't seen you live is a sadder human being, because they really need to come out and see you when you can get back out there and play again.
I can't wait. And thanks, Nick. Thanks for having me. This has been a lot of fun.
My pleasure. Stay healthy, and let's get through this year somehow.
All right. Mask up.
All right. Thanks, Bob.
Bye-bye.
Well, that's our show this week. I hope you enjoyed it and maybe even learned a little something. To follow what's going on with this podcast, you can go to theradicalpod.com. Theradicalpod.com. You'll find show notes and past episodes, and even a little swag there if you want a t-shirt or a hat. Also, I would be honored if you'd subscribe at Apple or Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts. Till next week.